Hello students. In this session, we'll start with the discussion of climate change. Now, climate change is a topic that you will see in the newspapers day in and day out. It's not a topic which is new. It is not something that we observed just a couple of years ago, but the discussions on climate change has been going on forever. It was in 1960s when for the first time, you can say a movement for climate change started, when a book called Silent Spring was published. And it for the first time started to give us data with regards to what could happen if climate change is not being dealt with, if we don't take steps to counter the effects of climate change. After that, there were a lot of researches that were done. And in the last few decades, we have seen enormous rise in various aspects. So we have evidences that suggest that climate is changing and climate is changing rapidly. And we need to take steps very quickly, very rapidly to counter the effects of climate change. Now, when I say climate change is not something which is completely man-made. It's not anthropogenic altogether. But there are some natural causes also which lead to climate change. But when we say climate change, we mainly are discussing a phenomena called as global warming. Now, when we say global warming is not a phenomena which is associated generally with natural causes. It's a phenomena which is associated with man-made effects. And at least over last 200 years, we have seen enormous growth happening, enormous industrialization happening, which has led to rapid urbanization and rapid growth in each and every aspect of human life. But at the same time, it has led to depletion of resources. It has led to increased amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It has led to increased amount of other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So all this has happened over last 200 years, and that's why when you hear the term global warming, just understand that this is a term which is associated with the man-made effects, especially over the last 200 to 250 years, ever since Industrial Revolution started. So Industrial Revolution is basically a part that you will study as a part of your world history classes. But ever since Industrial Revolution started, we have seen a rapid growth in the levels of greenhouse gases and depletion of resources, deforestation, etc., which has led to a global warming, led to a kind of climate change where human or anthropogenic causes have overtaken the natural effects that would lead to normal climate change, which has led to rapid rise in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, rise in the sea levels that we have, rise in the global average temperatures of the earth. So all these kind of things will have counterproductive effects on human existence. So if we talk about climate change, let's try to understand what is climate change, what are the causes of climate change, and there we'll first start our discussion with global warming, and we'll see what are the causes or the human induced causes of global warming. To start with, if I talk about just the climate change, so what you can say is that Earth's climate has actually changed throughout the history. Just if we talk about last 7 lakh odd years, you would come to know that there have been several cycles of glacial advances and glacial retreats. And with the abrupt end of last glacial retreat, which happened approximately 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, this is what marks the beginning of modern climate era and also of the existence of human civilization. But what is of relevance for us is the current warming trend. The current warming trend is of particular significance because it is extremely likely, and by extremely likely we are talking about the factor of more than 95% probability that this has happened as a result of human activity since the mid 20th century, and the proceedings are happening at a rate which are unprecedented. The heat trapping nature that we have of the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. What are greenhouse gases? We'll have a discussion on it once we are done with the introduction part. They have demonstrated that it has increased in the atmosphere. Now, there is no question that the greenhouse gases must be causing the warming that has been happening on the earth. The evidence that we have for rapidly changing global climate change is also compelling. Just to give you a few examples of what has been happening in and around, first of all, there has been a global rise in temperature. If you just have a look at this particular diagram, the planet's average surface temperature has risen to about 1.1 degrees Celsius since the late 19th century. The planet's average surface temperature has risen by around 0.9 degrees Celsius since 19th century. Now, this is a change which is largely driven by the increased amount of carbon dioxide and other human-made emissions that have happened in the atmosphere. Now, most of the warming occurred in the past 40 to 50 years or so. 5 of the warmest years that the earth has ever recorded has just happened since 2010. So we are just talking about last decade or so. Out of which, if we just consider 2016, in the year 2016, 8 of the 12 months of the year were actually the warmest months on record ever recorded. Not only this is about the temperature. If we talk about the oceans, our oceans have been receiving most of the heat, and most of this heat that is being absorbed by the oceans, they are within the top 700 meters of the ocean, and that's why there has been a warming of the oceans as well. And what we have observed is that approximately 0.1 to 0.15 degrees Celsius increase in temperature of the oceans have happened. Temperatures have increased, the oceans are warmer. What else? There is a shrinking of ice sheets that have been seen. Whether Greenland or the Antarctic ice sheets, we have seen a decrease in mass there. So we have discussed our temperatures, that is rising at least by 1.1 degrees Celsius. We have talked about our oceans, and oceans have become warmer at least by 0.1 to 0.15 degrees Celsius. What else? If you talk about the global ice sheets, whether you talk about the North Pole or the South Pole, we have observed that there has been a decrease in ice mass in Antarctica and in the Arctic region as well. One set of data collected by NASA, it said that if we just discuss Greenland, in the period 1993 to 2016, Greenland has lost 281 billion tons of ice. In the same period, if you talk about the Antarctic region, in the Antarctic region in the same period, that is 1993 to 2016, what we saw was that there was a decrease in ice sheets by 118 billion tons. So the rate at which the ice is decreasing is huge, both at the North Pole and at the South Pole. This is another evidence. What else? We also have seen something called as glacial retreat. What do we mean by glacial retreats? That whether you talk about Himalayas, the Alps, the Andes, Rockies Mountain, Alaska, Africa, all these regions have been seeing that there has been a decrease in the glacial movement, or glaciers have been retreating. So in all the mountainous regions, this has been observed. Not only this, if you talk about snow cover, satellite observations that have been made, they have revealed that the amount of spring snow cover that was there in the northern hemisphere has also decreased over the past 4 to 5 decades. And most importantly, the rise in sea level. Global sea level has approximately risen by 20 centimeter in the last 100 years. In the last 100 years by 20 centimeters. The rise in the last 2 decades actually has been nearly the double of what we have seen in the decades before that. So actually there has been an acceleration in the way the rise in sea level has been seen. Not only this, there is another phenomena which is ocean acidification. Since the Industrial Revolution, the acidity of the surface ocean water has also increased, and it has been as high as an increase of 30% since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And this also has been an effect of the human activities itself, that we have increased the amount of carbon dioxide that is being given to the atmosphere and which is being absorbed by the oceans. So the amount of carbon dioxide absorbed by the upper layer of the oceans has been increasing by approximately 2 billion tons per year. We are talking about a fact of 2 billion tons per year. So these are just a few facts that we know about climate change. These are just a few of the evidences that we have for climate change. The effects, we'll have a discussion on it, what are the causes and what are the effects, and the effects you'll come to know are very, very catastrophic if we do not keep a check in all the causative agents which lead to climate change. So we'll have a discussion on that. But when we have a discussion on climate change, the very first thing that we should try to understand is what is weather and what is climate. Because when we say climate change and when we say weather change, there is a lot of difference between the two. For example, when you say you have fever or a viral fever, it happens due to weather change. It doesn't happen due to climate change. So what is weather and what is climate? I'm very sure that you have already read that in geography. But just to brief you on that, first of all, weather consists of short-term changes in the atmospheric variables such as the temperature, the precipitation, all that in a given area over a period of days to months. We do not talk about a decade or 100 years or within 500 years. No. That happens in case of climate. When we say climate change is basically determined, or climate is determined by the average weather conditions of the earth or of a particular area, especially temperature and precipitation over decades to 1000 years. Normally when we talk about climate, we take into account 3 decades. A minimum of 3 decades is taken into account whenever we talk about climate. So in talking about climate change, it is very, very important for us to distinguish between what is weather and what is climate. As we just discussed, weather consists of short-term changes in the atmospheric variables. Whether you talk about temperature or the precipitation of a given area, we talk about short-term changes, a period of hours or days. But when we say climate, by contrast, climate basically is determined by average weather conditions over a period of time for the entire earth or for a given area for at least 3 decades. We can take even hundreds of years to determine the climate of a region. So that's why you say that weather today is colder or weather today is hotter, but you don't say that climate of a particular region is like this or changing today and changing tomorrow. Climate remains constant, weather changes over time. And this actually is one of the phenomena which is made use of by many of the skeptics. That when they say that climate change is not real and when they say that climate change is natural, what they try to do is that the fluctuations that happen in the weather over, let's say, a couple of years, that will be taken into account. So that is not the case with the climatologists who are studying the climate change. They look at the data and they look at these fluctuating weather conditions on a day-to-day basis for a particular area or for the entire earth to see if there has been a general rise or fall in the average temperature or precipitation over at least 30 years to up to 100 years or even longer period of time. So the skeptics, what they might do is they would try to point you to a year which has been colder or which does not set on the pattern that you normally see as a part of climate change, and they would say, look, there hasn't been any change in climate that has happened. So all that is not real, all that is unreal, and that is something that has been happening. We have seen that the US regime has not been a fan of climate change. They don't like to address the fact that there has been a climate change. And they address to these kind of facts that there is a natural change that is happening. There is a natural decrease or increase which is happening, which is not related anywhere to the anthropogenic factor. But we should not believe that. Let me make this very clear. So I'm very sure that what is weather and what is climate is understood, and as a part of geography you would have already read this. Now, one phenomena we should try to understand, that is it a new phenomena? That is climate change new? Have we not ever seen climate change? The answer to it is no. The climate change is nothing new. The climate change is neither new nor I would say that it is unusual. Over past 3.5 billion years, the planet's climate has been altered by volcanic emissions, by change in solar input, by movement of tectonic plates, the impact of meteors on the earth, and there have been other factors as well. Over past 8 to 9 lakh odd years, the atmosphere has experienced a prolonged period of global cooling and global warming. And these alternating cycles of freezing and thawing are also known as glacial and interglacial periods. They are called as glacial and interglacial periods, right? But for the past 10,000 years, we have had a very fairly good fortune that we have lived in an era where the average temperature of the atmosphere has remained fairly stable, but has began rising over the last century when people started clearing more forests and burning more fossil fuels. And these conditions have allowed the human populations to flourish. It allowed the agriculture to develop, it allowed the cities to grow. But over past 250 odd years, what we have seen is that more use of fossil fuels started, clearing of forests started, and all this has led to the increase in greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide. And if you just look at the levels of carbon dioxide, you'll see that for the last so many years, I'm starting from approximately 4 lakh years. So if you look at all these years, you'll see that all this remained fairly stable and there has been a pattern. But if you just look at this part, it is not going down like this. It has just risen. And there has been a steep increase in the amount of carbon dioxide level just in the last 50 odd years. And this is the problem that we are facing. How carbon dioxide is dangerous, how it is causing climate change, we'll have a discussion on it. But this has been a major cause of concern ever since Industrial Revolution started. Even before that, if you go back to the medieval periods in Europe, there have been some rulers who actually had banned the use of fossil fuels, especially coal, for using as a domestic fuel. And they did it back in 1200s and 1300s, understanding that it has been a major cause of air pollution. But ever since Industrial Revolution started, we have not looked back. And after that, the amount of emissions that we have done has been huge, has been unprecedented. And this has led to this kind of rise in the global temperatures, which is called as global warming. So, what is global warming? Global warming, very simply, is the phenomena of increasing average air temperatures near the surface of the earth over the past 1 to 2 centuries. So that's why we are talking about human-induced effects. Global warming is not a term that we associate with natural climate change. It is related to human-induced effects or anthropogenic effects. So the influence of human activities since at least the beginning of Industrial Revolution has been deeply woven into the very fabric of climate change. So what we have seen is majorly a global increase in temperatures, climate is changing, global average temperature has risen, and climate scientists have since, you can say, the mid 20th century gathered detailed observation of various weather phenomena, whether temperature or precipitation, various climatic factors, etc. When they studied their influences on the climate effects, the data indicated that if you take any time scale from the beginning of geological cycle, the influence of human activities since the beginning of Industrial Revolution has been drastically changing the climate. Now, giving a voice to the growing conviction most of the scientific community which agrees to, we actually formed something called as IPCC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was formed in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Program. Now in 2013 and 14, IPCC came out with its 5th assessment report. And this report basically gave us all the data with regards to increasing global temperatures. So if you just look at the data that was given by IPCC report, first of all, it reported that the interval between 1880 to 2012, it saw an increase in the global average temperatures by approximately 0.9 degrees Celsius and an increase closer to 1.1 degrees Celsius when measured relative to pre-industrial ages, that is after 1750 to 1800. Now, it also stated that most of the warming which is observed over the second half of 20th century, and this would be attributed to human activities. Not only this, it predicted that by the end of the 21st century, the global mean surface temperature would rise by 0.3 to 5.4 degrees Celsius. Now, why is there such a huge difference between what we see as an increase in the global temperatures? So, just for that, if you have a look at this particular diagram, you will understand this, that this is the most that would happen and this is the least that would happen. This would be an ideal case when we are very stringent with all the laws that we are making for the environment to tackle the phenomena of current climate change. In that case, we would still remain fairly stable, and this rise would be not more than 0.3 to 0.4 degrees Celsius. But if we don't do that, if we actually keep on emitting the fossil fuels like we are doing, we keep on emitting the greenhouse gases in the way we are doing, then in that case it could be as high as we discussed, 5.4 degrees Celsius, which would be catastrophic. I mean, there would be no existence of humans, there would be no existence of most of the species on the planet. It is actually saying that more than 40% of all the species that are there on the earth would cease to exist if such a thing happens, that there is a rise of more than 5.4 degree Celsius. What else? IPCC report also said that the global average sea level has actually risen by 19 to 21 centimeter between 1901 to 2010, and that the sea levels rose faster in the second half of 20th century than in the first half. So what we mean to say is that there has been an acceleration in the way sea level is also rising, and that also needs to be checked. Also, it predicted that by the end of 21st century, the global average sea level could rise by another 29 to 95 centimeter relative to the 1986 to 2005 average, that is a rise of approximately 1 meter, could not be ruled out. So this again, why there is so much of deviation? Because if we take stringent actions, we'll be fine, but if we don't, in that case it will be catastrophic. See, when I say a rise of 0.9 degrees Celsius, a rise of 1.1 degrees Celsius, a rise in sea level by 29 centimeter, all this may not look to you as a very alarming data, but believe me, it is. When we discuss the effects of climate change, we'll come to know how exactly even 1 degree rise in temperature could be catastrophic. Because if we say that there is a rise by 2 degrees Celsius in a short period of time, such an increase would damage the existence of many animal species. There could be shift in the patterns of agriculture. There would be rise in sea levels, as we discussed. So all this kind of things could be very catastrophic for the entire existence of life on earth. Now, to give you a summary of another something that they told about the greenhouse gases, it reported that the concentration of carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxides in the atmosphere surpassed those found in the ice cores, which are dating back to 8 lakh years. Not only this, at the beginning of the industrial age, in the mid 18th century, the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere were roughly 280 parts per million, but the 2014 data, in the mid of 2014, the carbon dioxide level reached more than 400 parts per million, and if the fossil fuels continue to be burnt at the current rates, they are projected to reach 560 parts per million by the mid of 21st century. Essentially, we are saying that there is a doubling of carbon dioxide concentration in 300 years only, and this is the first data that we saw, as we discussed in this particular picture, that there has been a fairly stable rise and fall in the levels of carbon dioxide, but after 1950s we are seeing a steep rise in the level of carbon dioxide concentration on the earth. So next, let's try to understand what is global warming, what is climate change, what are the causes of climate change, and how each and every change is being altered by human activities.